Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1996 crime, drama, thriller, dark comedy, Freeway. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I would like to give a special shout out to Brian for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. A link to both will be in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, Freeway is one of those films that, in my opinion, it's the epitome of a cult classic. It's a movie that when it came out, it got some good reviews from the critics that actually were able to see it in a theater. And it started to definitely pick up some steam on home video, enough that it ultimately got a direct-to-video sequel. And it's a film that I was definitely aware of. I knew of its existence for many, many years. I remember reading some pretty high praise from some critics that I genuinely respect. So it's a film that I've always been curious about, but I guess because of the subject matter, I just didn't really put it very high on my watch list. But after seeing it for only the first time, I think it's one of the best films of 1996. And I thought it was great. I thought it was a fantastic film. And it's one of those movies that's very irreverent. It's very screwed in the head. And it's definitely not a film that's for everyone. But if you can stomach the dark comedy, if you can stomach the intensity of it, the violence, the visceral nature, I think that there's a lot to genuinely admire and appreciate about Freeway. Now, Freeway is both written and directed by the same guy, Matthew Bright. Now, this was the first film in his filmography, and I think he did a bang up job for his first time out as a director. This is a very daring film in a multitude of different ways, and that includes the direction. This is a movie that has a lot of very daring types of shots in terms of wide shots or pans or zooms. It's not a film that is staying still when it comes to the camera work. It's not afraid to move around and use some different perspectives or some different POV shots or zooms or close ups and things of that nature. It's very much a low budget kind of movie, and the direction definitely does show that. But when it comes to the kind of film that is very grungy and exploitative, it just fits this kind of direction where it's almost guerrilla filmmaking, where he's just there in a certain seedy part of town and is just turning the camera on and seeing what happens next, is the kind of visual vibe and style that you get from Bright when it applies to his work in Freeway. And I think it's definitely something that's efficient. I think it fits with the film. And overall, yeah, I do. I think that Matthew did a pretty marvelous job considering the circumstances, considering it's his first film, and considering he was even working with some pretty established, well-known actors like Kiefer Sutherland and some up-and-coming stars like Reese Witherspoon. And he got some really great performances out of everyone in his cast. So he didn't seem like he was out of his depth or like he was somebody who was kind of a pushover on set or a guy who didn't necessarily know how to fully get the actors to buy into his vision. That definitely was not the case at all when it comes to his work in this film. And unlike some other filmmakers who have done double duty, who have done direction and writing, I think his writing is every bit as well done as his direction is. I think he's a great writer as well as a great director. He's an example of one of those dual threat filmmakers that actually is capable of doing both jobs and doing them well. And the script is just, in my opinion, is brilliant. It's full of some really genius, great social satire when it comes to the media and the police and education and various other different subsets of society. There's subtext in this script, but it's rather subtle. And because of that, it never really comes across as forced. It just is there under the surface. And it's also a really brilliant twist on the old story of Little Red Riding Hood, complete with a climax that is a take on the story and actually the finale of the story involving the big bad wolf, but instead of it being a wolf, it's a serial killer. And I just think it's just a really compelling and just irreverent and genuinely funny script, despite its very dark and very intense subject matter. It's one of those films that also deals with characters that are not really inherently likable. They're not necessarily good people. I don't even think there is really like a straightforward hero or even protagonist in this. It's one of those screenplays where pretty much the main two characters are both antagonists in some way or another. Just one is a little bit worse than the other. And I think for some people that might be a turnoff. And that is something that does tend to bother me in other instances with other films, but not here. And I think the reason for that is the tone is very consistent when it comes to the overall script. There's not really a lot of moments with this screenplay where the tone is inconsistent or it just veers into a completely different direction. It's very consistent and very much on the same path. And it's twisted, it's honestly pretty depraved when you look at a lot of the elements of the plot, but it's just one of the things that actually make the story as compelling as it winds up being. It deals with this teenager named Vanessa Lutz, who is illiterate, and she's the daughter of a prostitute. Her real father has been out of the picture and has been dead for many, many years. She's got a stepfather, but her stepfather abuses her physically and sexually. She winds up uh, potentially going back to foster care at the start of the story after her mother gets arrested and her stepfather also is brought in tow. So now she's left without a home, and so a parole officer, who is also the person that is responsible for finding her a place to stay, comes over and is telling her that you're going to be put back into the foster care system. She had a really bad experience with the foster care system previously with some creepy old guy who tried to take advantage of her. So she doesn't want to go through that again. So she ties the parole officer to the bed and then leaves and goes on her own. And she's trying to find her grandmother. So she's trying to go to grandmother's house, just like the story, Little Red Riding Hood. And she even takes a basket along with her belongings. And initially, she's trying to get her boyfriend to go with her, but he declines. And for his trouble, he winds up getting shot by some gangbangers. And then, yeah, she's driving down the freeway, and the freeway is tied into the plot of the film because it's the setting of this series of murders called the I-5 murders, where there's this guy who's going around killing these girls on the freeway, which is actually there's actually a real serial killer who did this. And I think he was called the Freeway Killer, or there was like the I-5 Killer or something along those lines, because it was actually covered in a segment in Unsolved Mysteries. And yeah, that guy would just use the freeway to go to different places that were on the way, or close to the freeway, and he would just kill people, shoot them, and then go back onto the freeway overpass on foot and just disappear. And I think he's also a guy they never caught. They never caught the guy. The guy was never caught or convicted. Um, so they don't fully copy that though, because the Freeway Killer in the Unsolved Mysteries case, he would go to these strip malls and he would kill people, and he would do it with a gun. The killer here, he's more of let's just say the typical serial killer type that you see in a lot of films, where he's a sadistic, and he's involved in sexual assault and things like necrophilia, and he likes to torture his victims both psychologically and physically, and likes to kill them with knives and other implements like that, or strangle them. He's not really into the whole idea of just shooting them and then heading off on the freeway and uh, getting out of there. That's not really the kind of a killer that this guy is. And initially, though, things seem like they might be okay. Where Vanessa winds up getting picked up by this guy who seems like he's meaning well, gives her a ride, and the first impression is that this guy is not a bad guy at all. But then you find out that he's actually the I-5 killer. And the way you find out about that is gradual and slow, and it's handled so well that it's downright chilling, because of just how he he shows his evil dark side by disguising it as if he's helping her get through her trauma. So he's going through these kind of therapy sessions with Vanessa while they're driving around. And this guy, Bob Wolverton, he's a counselor at a school. He's actually a school counselor. And so he's using his experience as a counselor to to get off, because he's trying to get her to admit certain things that sexually excite him and arouse him, and it's all kinds of messed up. It really is, and it's handled without holding anything back, and that's something I really appreciate about Matthew Bright's screenplay and this film in general, is that it does not hold back. Like, this is a movie that goes for the jugular. It has no mercy. And I think for some people that might be too much for them to take, especially when it comes to the unrated cut. The unrated cut, you got like a really intense scene where Bob is he's he's infuriated at Vanessa because she doesn't want to go along with his whole thing anymore. She doesn't want to cooperate. She doesn't want to continue to do this psychological abuse. And since she's not cooperating with him anymore, he snaps and he calls her the C word like numerous times and beats her. And it's like really intense stuff. And that's in the unrated cut. The theatrical version and the version that was initially released on video was was trimmed down because of content like that. And I can see why some people feel that that should have been cut out, but I don't mind it because of the fact that a lot of this script is intentionally abrasive. And to have Bob also be as abrasive as your protagonist, it just continues to cloud things. It continues to really blur the lines between these characters. And I mean, why not? Like the guy is a sicko. So it's like why would you hold back? And Vanessa at a certain point, because she's so tired of being psychologically and physically abused by Bob on this ride from hell, she decides to take advantage of a situation where they had to pull the car off to the side, and uses a gun that her boyfriend gave her that she was going to use to like get some money because she was going to sell it, but instead she uses it to defend herself. And this is all after Bob has like cut off her ponytail, and he's just really starting to cross the line to the point where he's probably about to kill her. And instead she turns the tables on Bob and puts a gun up to his head and gets him to act all scared, and she has him like beg for his life. And then she ultimately shoots him a bunch of times, takes his money, and then continues on her journey to go to see her grandmother. But she ultimately winds up getting caught by the police. And what follows after this is just pure lunacy and just craziness, because somehow Bob, the I-5 killer, survives what should be mortal wounds, and he's all disfigured and he's like wearing like a head brace. And because of the fact that he survived, and because of the fact that he's this pillar of this community and he's a school counselor, the media assumes that this guy is a great guy, like he's an upstanding citizen. So you see all these media interviews on televisions throughout this part of the film that show Bob and his wife, and they're uh, talking about how they appreciate all the letters and everybody wishing them well, and talking about how they are going to get justice for Bob and for what happened to him. And all the while, that Bob is a sick, perverted serial killer. But the media doesn't know that, so they just run with this whole thing that he's innocent. And instead, they aim the target towards Vanessa, this teenage delinquent who has a long history of criminal acts. You even have a whole scene where she's being essentially interrogated by these two officers, and they're getting her to tell them about her rap sheet, and it just gets longer and longer and longer. And then it gets to a certain point where she just starts cussing and throwing out racial slurs at the African American police officer, the detective who's working on the case. And you're like, man, this girl is a total bitch, just an awful person. But they aren't doing the right thing in terms of the investigation. They're not believing her. They think that because of her track record that she's guilty, that she didn't do this for self-defense, and that Bob was innocent. And it's exactly what Bob told her was going to happen, because Bob himself told her that, hey, if you turn me in, then they're just gonna think that you did it, or I'm gonna get let go because of my status in society and in the community. You're the one that's gonna go to jail, and you won't be able to see your grandmother. So that's exactly what is starting to happen. But as the film goes on, the investigation continues. These detectives, they start to see that things aren't adding up with Bob and his story, and they decide to go a little deeper in terms of trying to figure out some extra stuff in terms of the case, and it leads to the same detective who had a bunch of racial slurs thrown at him, going to the scene of the crime and finding Vanessa's ponytail. And so now that leads to them seeing Bob as an actual suspect for assaulting her and for being the I-5 killer. And they go to Bob's house, and of course his wife is like, I'm not going to sign a search warrant. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to do that. And of course, while this is all happening, Vanessa's in jail, and you have the whole stuff involving her and the other girls in the prison, or not necessarily the prison, the facility, so to speak, because she's underage. And this one girl that she beats the absolute shit out of winds up becoming a friend of hers, and they break out of prison. So now it's a prison break film. And so she's broken out of prison with this other girl who gives her another gun and gives her some money to go on her way. And so she's robbing tricks in order to get some extra cash. And she's still trying to go to see her grandmother. So you have the police investigation that's going on. You have the detectives who are interviewing people that know Vanessa, including this girl who went to high school with her, who, when they were like preteens, actually tried to do some tricks. They tried to do some prostitution, and it didn't go well, and they got busted. And this girl is like disabled, and it's all kinds of messed up. It really is. And that's also the scene when the African American detective, he realizes that um Vanessa was dating this African American man named Chopper. And so he's just taken aback by it because he can't believe that this girl who called him all kinds of racial slurs was in love with a black man. And then Dan Hedaya had to his character, the detective, he had to like tell him, this sometimes happens. Detective Garnet Wallace, because the other guy I think is Detective Mike Breer. So Mike is the African American detective. And so Mike's the one that goes to the crime scene and finds Vanessa's ponytail, and then that speeds up the investigation, and now Bob's the prime suspect. They go to his house. His wife doesn't want to sign the search warrant, but they have enough probable cause, so they start searching anyway. They find this shed and in the back of the house, and they cut it open with some bolt cutters, and then all this child pornography starts falling out of the shed, and it's like piles and piles, like a mountain of child pornography. And his wife finds out about that, and then she winds up taking her own life because she can't deal with the reality of her husband, this upstanding citizen, this school counselor, being such a sick, perverted person. And at this point, Bob has healed up enough that he can walk on his own, but he's still horribly disfigured. He can only speak with like one of those electric things, that you put towards your neck, and it makes you sound like you're a robot. And now he's deciding to implement a plan of revenge to get back at Vanessa. And this is after he's already realized that he's caught The police were at his house. He drives away. Now he's deciding he's going to get back at Vanessa by killing her grandmother in a absolutely just twisted way, like strangles her to death, also sexually assaults her. She's like all tied up, hog-tied in a chair. And this is where you get to the Little Red Riding Hood element that's brought into the story again, where now he's like dressing up as Vanessa's grandmother, and Vanessa, she's escaped from prison and she's on her way to her grandmother's house, which is a trailer in some trailer park. And so she ultimately finds her way to grandmother's house, sees what she thinks is grandmother, but it's actually Bob. And so then she winds up fighting with Bob and then ultimately strangles and kills him. And the police were also on their way, and they wound up at the trailer park. And like the last shot of the film is Vanessa just a complete and utter mess because she's been thrown around like a rag doll by Bob before she ultimately got the upper hand and strangled him. And like her mascara is running, her makeup is just absolutely all over the place. She's looking disheveled, and she's like, can you give me a cigarette?" And she's like just smoking a cigarette, sitting in a lawn chair while the cops are watching her. And that's the end of the story. And it's intense. Like I said, a lot of intense subject matter: sexual assault, serial killer stuff, abuse, a lot of talk and a lot of commentary, a lot of discussions about sexual and physical abuse of underage kids. It's definitely not for the faint of heart, and it's definitely not for weak stomachs. But it just does it in a way that is so darkly comic and over the top at times that it just comes across as a twisted, dark, social commentary fairy tale. That's really what it comes across as, which is the intent. It's supposed to be a twisted, dark version of Little Red Riding Hood. And I feel that Matthew Bright nailed that concept and just did a amazing job with it. And yeah, like I said, it's not a film that I would probably say I would watch over and over again. But it's a movie that I really liked because of just how it didn't pull any punches and how at times it was genuinely hilarious when it comes to some of the lines of dialogue and just some of the scenarios and the situations. The the moment when Vanessa is just completely fed up with everything and she decides to rob this trick. It reminded me of some of the scenes that you would see in something like Joel Schumacher's Falling Down, which I'm also a huge fan of. So yeah, it's such a twisted, just a bizarre, weird film, but it's also unquestionably unique, and I think that's definitely something that makes it really a standout film in the genre that it's a part of. But the cast is absolutely something that elevates this movie. As good as the writing and the script is, and as good as the direction is, without the right cast, I don't think it would all come together as well as it does. Kiefer Sutherland is Bob. This is honestly one of his best performances. He's just so insidious and so intense and genuinely terrifying on more than one occasion. He does a great job playing this guy who you think, based on your first impression, is somebody you can trust, but then revealing his dark side. And yeah, it's just a really amazing performance by Kiefer Sutherland. Uh, Especially when it comes to the scenes when he's acting under all of his makeup and is still able to effectively showcase the right amount of menace. And Reese Witherspoon was wonderful, just really something else as Vanessa. This is honestly one of her best performances because it's just such a daring and difficult role. Like this character of Vanessa is a vile person, but the way that Reese plays it, there's a certain endearing and kind of fun quality to this character when it comes to her just telling it like it is and her being in a lot of ways the victim, but also being somebody who is a psychopath in her own way. So it's like she's just completely unhinged, but she's also a victim of this other person who is unhinged themselves. So it just goes to show you that, it's not always, the innocent people that are victimized. And I just feel that Reese's performance it was terrific. It was just really good. And she had some great comic timing as well when it comes to some of her more outrageous dialogue, and some really good scenes of acting when it comes to her being conflicted when it comes to her actions, and or feeling isolated, or feeling vulnerable, and just a really tremendous performance. And the rest of the supporting cast is good too. Wolfgang Bodison is Detective Mike Breer. Dan Hedaya is Detective Garnet Wallace. The two of them were a good duo. Amanda Plummer, she was only in like the film for like maybe 5 minutes or less. She played Vanessa's mother, but she left a significant impact with this just really trashy character. But it was so raw and it was so real. Like her take on this prostitute mother, uh, it just felt like something that was straight out of real life. It didn't really feel like it was some kind of over the top caricature of a prostitute. Um, Brooke Shields was also really solid as Mimi, Bob's wife. Definitely one of her better acting roles. And You got Michael T. Weiss, who played Larry, who was this guy was just a total loser and just annoying. But that's the whole point of this character, and I think the guy just really nailed that performance. You also got like Bokeem Woodbine, who's in it for a little bit as Chopper, who is Reese Witherspoon's boyfriend. You've got Brittany Murphy, who is in this as a girl who is bunking with Vanessa in the facility. Uh, you also have Alana Ubach, who plays Mosquita, who is the girl that befriends Vanessa, and then they wind up going on the run. Um, and you even have somebody like Conchata Farrell, who you might recognize from sitcoms and other stuff like that. She plays Vanessa's a parole officer. But yeah, pretty great cast. And some good cinematography by John Thomas, effectively seedy and grimy and gritty, and raw. The editing by Maisie Hoy I thought was definitely an honorable and job well done, especially when it comes to some of the more manic, uh, intense scenes. And the music by Danny Elfman was excellent. This is one of his more underrated scores. It really added an extra level to this film, an extra layer of brilliance and an attitude, and just it really is like one of his best scores, at least the main theme. Like I love the main theme and the opening credits. It's just manic, and it's just all kinds of crazy and wild, but it's quintessential Danny Elfman, and it just fits the film so well. And apparently he did it for only $1 and some yard work, because he realized that Matthew Bright, he couldn't afford to hire him, but he was into the concept, and apparently liked what he was seeing in terms of what Bright put together for the film, that he was like, just give me $1 and do some yard work and I'll do it. Like that just shows how awesome Danny Elfman is. Like, what kind of composer, what kind of person in the industry is willing to work essentially for free like that? That is so cool. And the film had like had a running time of like 102 minutes and a budget of like 3 million. I think it's not that slow paced. I think it's a pretty well paced film overall. Like I rarely was ever bored, and in large part because it was just so unpredictable and crazy and wild, and I didn't necessarily know what was going to happen next. And the $3 million, I think a lot of it was probably for the cast, but it's also the kind of movie that you don't necessarily need to have like a ton of money to work with to create this kind of film. And but you know, it still was utilized well. I think the budget was utilized really well for the most part, especially when it comes to things like the makeup effects on Bob. So yeah, this is a kind of film that if you like dark, twisted comedies mixed with a serial killer element and some drama, then Freeway is a must see. Don't hesitate. Check this one out as soon as possible. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of Freeway, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.